right, everyone. It's good to be with you. This is the first broadcast of the Stranded Baptist podcast. I'm afraid this would be the best I can come up with royalty-free music, but hey, we're here playing some reggae, I guess. But yeah, I'm coming at you from Reykjavik, Iceland. This is the Stranded Baptist. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. My name is Gunnar Gunnarsson, and I'm the pastor of Logan Baptistakirkja here in Reykjavik, Iceland. Currently the only Icelandic-speaking Baptist church in the country, as well as the only Reformed church in the country. And in today's episode, we'll be covering a broad range of topics, including the Logan Paul controversy. He is a big YouTuber. If you don't know who Logan Paul is, then I think he is the biggest YouTuber that YouTube has right now. He's been going through a lot of controversy lately, and it has some theological implications. I want to go into the President Trump controversy, and I know you can't really just say that the President Trump controversy, because it seems like every other day he's having a new controversy, but we're going to be sort of diving into the pro-life movement in the U.S. They just had the March for Life in America, and we're going to compare that to what the pro-life movement looks like here in Iceland right now. And we'll be diving into some of the questions posted by our listeners, or I guess they really haven't been listeners so far since this is our first episode, but by people who are following our episode and waiting for the first one to come. We gave the ability to take part in the conversation and shape the conversation by going to our Google Drive, which we shared on our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Stranded Baptist, to hear you. What would you like for us to talk about? Do you have any questions with regards to Iceland, the culture here, the need here, or any news of the day that you're thinking about? So this episode is basically dedicated to the discussion of theology, the news of the day, and gospel ministry here in Reykjavik, Iceland. So if you want to take part in the discussion in the next episodes, you can go to our Facebook page. You'll see pinned to the top, we have our Google Drive, and there you can create a document where you can type in your question. You can also send in your questions to thestrandedbaptist@gmail.com, or you can preferably, that's why I have the TV here, preferably you can record a video on your phone or something like that and take part in the discussion. I didn't think it was a great idea having a extreme introvert host by himself, a sort of show talking about this, but I love doing video work, and I need to fill my partners in on what's been going on the ground here, and maybe this is a way to introduce others to the work going on in Iceland and the need for gospel ministry over here. But some of the questions that we're going to be diving into today that came through the Google Drive is why I'm the Stranded Baptist and not the Stranded Presbyterian. It's a good one. Why? What's the state of the theological climate in Iceland? How many churches are there? Are Icelanders receptive to Reformed theology? And is it true that only that 0% of young Icelanders believe God created the world? That's a good question. That's been going around a lot. That made some big headlines 2 years ago and even still today. And a question pertaining to church planting posted by a missionary asking how to start a church in a godless culture. And then there is what exactly is the Iceland Project, which I'm a part of, and how's the funding for our first translated book to Icelandic going. Lastly, we'll be diving into some of my testimony as to how God led us to the place we are today, and some of the events that have occurred over the years to shape our view of God and definitely work towards our sanctification. So as I said, I didn't think it was a great idea to get an extremely introverted person to host a discussion episode by himself. Here in the future, we will have some guests, both local and maybe if there are any ministry leaders or those that God is using for his kingdom here in the country. Iceland is increasingly becoming a very cool place to come visit. Then I hope to have them on here so that we can discuss theology and the news of the day and gospel ministry here in Iceland. But if you want to help this episode flourish, you can be a part of helping this introvert by shaping the conversation, by taking part in the conversation, by submitting your videos or your audio clips or your text to our Google Drive so that I can at least be talking to something. So this is our screen here ready to go for your videos. If you upload them, I would be happy to play them and we can have a little discussion. You can also send an email to thestrandedbaptist@gmail.com. Now, let's just dive into this. So we are I want to stop quickly because the Trump controversy and the Logan Paul controversy kind of play on each other. At least in my mind, they're dealing with the same theological issue. So the Logan Paul controversy, he's a big YouTuber. He has done some stupid stuff in the past. I know he's been in some of the mainstream media outlets there in the States because of his neighbors that are constantly calling the police. He is a guy that is not just a frat boy. He's not just partying during Friday and Saturday and Sundays. He's literally one of the biggest stars on YouTube, and a lot of fans know where he lives. He's not hiding the fact. He started bonfires in his swimming pool. He is having parties all day, every day, and his neighbors are going insane. But he topped himself. I think it was 2 weeks ago. He uploaded a video where he went to Japan, and he went to a forest, apparently, that's famous for its suicide rate. Apparently, there's like... every 3 days, someone goes into that forest in Japan and commits suicide. And they thought it would be great to do an episode where they go into the suicide forest. And I think the point of the episode was just going to be like a haunted thing. They were going to camp in the suicide forest. Lo and behold, they walk into the suicide forest and see that someone has hung himself on the tree. And he posted this video to a lot of people say that he posted this video to get YouTube views and that type of stuff, but he showed the body. I think he blurred out the face, but you could see his bloated fingers and that type of stuff. And a lot of people got furious at him for doing this. And so the reason why I'm talking about this and why it stuck out to me is because the outrage is merited. It's definitely merited that he did this, but it stuck out to me because from a humanistic and naturalistic perspective, really what are we being so outraged about? Like I can understand this from a theological perspective, from a Christian perspective, but it seems to point out there are streams of Christian thought still out there. And even if people do not know it, they're sort of, by the outrage towards this video, confessing that there's something different about us. There's something different about posting a video showing the dead body of this human being. You should have more respect. And it's pointing to this doctrine that Christians have held to for a long time, that we're not just another animal on this earth, but we are created in the image of God, the Doctrine of Imago Dei. And people generally don't get outraged over hunters posting pictures or videos of dead animals that they shot. In fact, many people celebrate. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I remember my dad called. He went a few times and shot some reindeer up here in the north of Iceland, and he put a picture of it up on his wall, and he was sort of sitting on it, holding its head up, and the picture was taken. And I remember when he was putting it up, he said, "Look or not, I'm riding Rudolph." So we do things like that where animals are killed and we're not really outraged by it. But this whole controversy has pointed to the fact that in us, there's something innate in us that recognizes we are more than just another animal. There's something more there. But from a naturalistic perspective, really, the outrage is unmerited. But there's something in you that says, no, that's definitely not right. However, I've noticed a lot of people talking about this, and this may be the perfect opportunity to ask some great questions in the midst of this controversy that may lead to gospel conversations. A lot of the young people will be talking about this. And so if you meet some young people that are talking about this may be the perfect opportunity for us to talk about the Imago Dei, that we really recognize the worth of an individual. The whole outrage really points to the fact that we all believe in this, that we're created in the image of our God, and we bear value for being human beings alone. And so I think it's a great conversation for the Christian to have, to be open to, now that this is all going over and this is still unfolding. I know he's drawn back from YouTube some. He's taken time off. It kind of looks like he's absolutely ruined about this whole scenario. But it's a perfect opportunity for us to keep our eyes open and see how God would use us in the midst of these controversial issues to be able to speak towards the gospel. And now I want to move over to another area that's kind of connected to this same theological issue, the Imago Dei. And President Trump was the first president in history to talk about the pro-life March for Life, done yearly around the anniversary of Roe versus Wade decision. He's the first president to do this, and I think they've done the March for Life for 45 years, if I remember correctly. Thousands of people hit the streets in America, in American cities, and even outside of America. And it's interesting that with President Trump as the president of the U.S., it's not really just enough to say, well, the Trump controversy. It's not like Watergate anymore. It's just like there's a new controversy every day. And I feel sorry for my American friends because, the media just seems to be going crazy. Even here in Iceland, man, I'm stuck on an island. I'm the stranded Baptist, and I get bombarded with President Trump controversies almost every day. And some of it seems to be sort of fishing for something, but it's exhausting for me, and I can't imagine what it's like out there. But this particular day, I want to talk about this pro-life thing that he did. I wanted to also compare the pro-life movement to the pro-life movement here in Iceland. One of the things that when I saw these thousands of people walking in Chicago and Washington, D.C., I started wondering, like, what's happening here in Iceland? I know my parents' generation, and not just their generation. I know my parents specifically were a part of the pro-life movement here a few decades ago. Actually, my dad was the spokesperson for it. I think my mom was a secretary at one point. But I started looking at abortion here in Iceland and really who's talking about any of this. And I realized that from 1960 to 2015, since we've been keeping records of abortions, we now have 32,734 abortions recorded. And if those people would be alive today, now this is pretty crazy to me when I started thinking about it, they would make 10% of the Icelandic population. 10% of the Icelandic population. That is the population of Kópavogur, the second largest city in Iceland, where I live. And the pro-life movement and the voices speaking up against abortion have basically disappeared with a new generation that is now taking over and taking part of the leadership. And I know a lot of the Christians here are just tired. I know a lot of the Christians here are wanting to save their energy for something else and therefore avoid needless controversies. But at the same time, this is an issue that we have to speak on. And at the prenatal unit at the hospital, we spent some. I was thinking about last year, now in the beginning of this year, and I was thinking about how much time we spent at the hospital. And our oldest son, as some of you know, he has been diagnosed with leukemia. He was going through chemo, and he's been going through chemo since 2016. He was doing the heavy dosage thing at the hospital. I know, and now in April, our son was born last year, and we had to spend about 3 months at a hospital. All in all, I think we spent over a third of the year at the hospital. But I remember at the prenatal unit, every time that I walked in there to go see Solomon, my son who was born, I would look at this wall of pictures, big wall of pictures, and there would be young children and teenagers holding pictures of themselves as babies born prematurely. They were born, I think one was like 20 weeks plus 6 days. There was a few that were born 21st week of pregnancy, and then a few born the 22nd week of pregnancy. And it was a wall of pictures dedicated to celebrating the life saved of these people. And I remember it was so surreal. It was the same time when the news broke that basically Iceland is close to eradicating Down syndrome, and they made it sound like it was a major medical achievement, but in reality, it is the fact that we're just getting abortions to anyone who shows signs of maybe having Down's syndrome. So there's almost no Down syndrome children born every year over here. And I remember the major conversation happening in Reykjavik at that time in my nation, when I was walking past that wall every day, looking at those prenatal children and the wall dedicated to celebrating lives saved. The major conversation was we should extend abortion to 22 weeks and 6 days. And there was a think tank set up by the government to think through abortions, really only suggesting one change with regards to abortion, and that was to stop referring to abortion as fostereyðing or fetus termination and move on to use the wording þungunarrof, meaning pregnancy discontinuity, to rid the talk around abortion of negative perceptions. That was just insane to me to hear. And here's an interesting dilemma. With the Logan Paul controversy, we've had people outraged over the fact that they saw a body created in the Imago Dei. And in abortion, we have people who do not only not see the body, but now we are changing the lingo, the wording, to dehumanizing the procedure that ends a life of a human being created in the image of God. And that's where we're at here in Iceland. So we say we celebrate diversity, and the funny thing is, not the funny thing, this is all super sad. The ironic twist of it all was that this conversation was happening around when the news broke about our abortion towards those with Down syndrome and that type of stuff. When the news broke, we were in the midst, Reykjavik was in the midst of celebrating the sort of festival that takes on 7 days. We call it different days, or hinsegin dagar, and it's a whole week dedicated to celebrate diversity. And on the Saturday, there's the big gay pride event where it's almost become like a family affair here in Iceland. I think over a third of our nation goes downtown every year, like over 100,000 people or something. It's completely flooded. And this weekend was going on, and really with this news breaking about Down syndrome children being aborted in the womb, I realized the fact, man, we really celebrate a very thin line of diversity. As long as you meet our criteria, we want to celebrate you. But if you don't, no. And it made me sad because my child was born handicapped, and there was a chromosomal issue. It's a chromosomal issue that only 2 other people in the world have. There was no screening for it in the womb. And I've got to think, man, like how many people that are congratulating us on the birth of my son, who is an absolute joy to us, would have decided to opt out with an abortion if there was a screening for it and if that was their child. And it's a sad reality that we live in, where we see the worth of an individual in sort of a capitalistic mindset, and, you know, where how much can you produce? It's really, really sad. How much can you produce? How well can you plug into the machine and contribute towards society? And if you can't, then, well, what kind of life is that anyway? Shouldn't we just end that right away? And I'm looking at my son. And if the medical diagnosis is right, and I know God can create a miracle, but if it goes like the other 2 individuals went through, he won't swallow, he won't talk, he won't hold his head up, he will always be limp. From a Christian perspective, that does not affect his worth because of this doctrine that we hold on to, the Imago Dei. And it's been interesting when thinking about this abortion issue and Logan Paul controversy to really see this is innate in us. And really see, you know, this think tank set up by the government who want to dehumanize this because they realize this is not good. It gives a negative perception, they say, if we say fetus termination. So let's dehumanize it and just call it pregnancy discontinuity, þungunarrof. Because we're trying to avoid the reality of what's been going on. And the only group I've heard to stand up against abortion here in Iceland have been the Catholics. I remember a couple of years ago, there would be 4 or 5 Catholics every week that would gather outside of the hospital/abortion clinic. So the births and the abortions take place in the same building. And they wouldn't go with signs or a ruckus or anything like that. They would literally stand on the lawn in a circle and pray together for God to end this abortion thing going on, where we're aborting literally 20% of all conceived children. There are 4,000 births recorded each year here in Iceland and 1,000 abortions. And they were praying, and they ended up getting escorted off the premises and banned from the premises to stand there on the grass and pray with no voices. They didn't have signs. They weren't yelling at people that were going in there. They were just praying. And as a son was born to me with severe handicap, I have come to realize that I have the privilege to lay my life down in service to him, displaying the gospel in some small way. And abortion is super antithetical to the gospel. When the gospel says, I will lay my life down for you as Christ did for our sins, abortion says, you will lay your life down for me. And we're now a nation that aborts around 20% of all conceived children who die in the womb, and there is no one talking about it. And yet again, I find myself at a place where I can think of so many people who would be more qualified and better suited to speak up on this issue, but they won't. And so I think I've got to. I think the Church of Christ has to. And so I just started a couple of days ago when I had the opportunity to do a small 20-minute radio program. I did a talk on this. And while I will be in the USA, our plans are to go to the USA in May as a family. I won't be here, but from 2019, I want to plan to start hosting our March for Life here in Iceland for the anniversary of the law that made abortion legal here, May 22nd. And I have a feeling I may be one of maybe 10 or 20 people that would do the march. We'll see what God does. But you got to start somewhere, And at least... before we move on over to other questions that have been posted into the show, I want to say that, that if you want to support the work here in Iceland, you can do that in 2 ways. Help the show and the podcast by liking this on YouTube or iTunes or Facebook or wherever you're watching or listening to this, sharing this, rating this, and so forth. That way you make this stuff way more Googleable. That may reach people that are looking into Iceland and Christianity here. And you can join us by praying for the work that is going on here in Iceland, both by praying and by giving towards it financially so that we can fund more missionaries and church planters here in Iceland through the Iceland Project. And so you can go to the Iceland Project website, which is theicelandproject.org. On the right corner, you will see sign up for the newsletter. We try to send that monthly-ish. I'm sometimes pretty late in typing that thing up. You can listen to this to try to be involved and know what's going on the ground here, and you can give towards the Iceland Project. If it's $10 a day, or if it's $15 or $20, or if you're a ministry leader and you want your church to be involved, I'll go a little bit, since one of the questions was, what is the Iceland Project? I'll go into a little bit of explaining what we do and what it's all about here in a little bit. But you know about that. So if you want to give towards the Iceland Project, you can find that at the bottom of every email update that we send out. There is the partnership where you get 3 different ways where you can give finances to the mission here. We are currently looking to finance one other couple that to come here so that they can work with our church for a couple of years and then be sent out from us to plant another church in downtown Reykjavik. So if you want to stay tuned about that, I'll be talking about that on the show in the future and so on and so forth. But you can find info on how to give at the bottom of our emails. And if you haven't signed up for emails and you want to see our latest update, you can go to the Iceland Project on Facebook and see, I think it's the last thing I shared, which was I just did today. You can open it up there, the email that I just sent out, and at the bottom of that email, you'll see the info. And so on to the question from the audiences, even though they technically were not audiences when they posted these questions, as this is our first episode. Let's start with one that I like a lot. Why are you the Stranded Baptist and not the Stranded Presbyterian? And the short answer, because we don't sprinkle babies. That's why I'm not the Presbyterian. Although I've got to admit, I just first came to appreciate the appeal of sprinkling yesterday when a guy that's getting baptized on Sunday asked me if I could baptize him in one of the rivers here in Iceland. I said, do you realize it's 0 degrees temperatures outside and I don't even know if the river is going to be frozen solid or not? And he's like, yeah, why not? So that's the first time I sort of got the appeal of sprinkling. But the short answer is that we don't sprinkle babies. No, but let me go into this. I do absolutely love my Presbyterian brothers and sisters. Would love for them to come over here. If anyone has a heart for planting a Presbyterian church in Iceland, I'd love to have one to reach the people that cannot become members of our church because of this issue with regards to baptism mainly. Plus, having someone here to just debate about baptism with, man. I gotta admit, the Lutherans, they don't put up much of a fight. You got this whole system with the covenant theology and stuff. Yeah, we can have some good conversations and debate about baptism, but the Lutherans, they give up fairly quickly. So I'd love to get some Presbyterians, brothers and sisters over here if someone would come and plant a church. Although I do think you're wrong with regards to baptism. First off, I don't see your case for pedobaptism. I get your perspective on covenant theology, and I'd hold to the Baptist covenant theology. But there are some differences, of course. There's a great book if you want to dive into that and realize sort of the distinctives of the Baptist covenant theology. It's a book that is just called that, The Distinctives of Baptist Covenant Theology by Pascal Denault. I know he's French, so I don't know exactly how to pronounce that last name. I think my friend Daniel, the French publishing guy, Henderson, had something to do with the making of that work into a reality, and I'm thankful for that. But in short, I feel like some eisegesis takes place when talking about pedobaptism from the Presbyterian point of view. I get your thinking, it's logical, but I find it difficult to make it scriptural. And so if you point me, if you want to dive into this more, it's probably better that you want to talk about a specific point of the covenant theology rather than sort of a broad brush stroke like we're doing here. But as a Baptist, I'd also be very different in my view of polity, especially the autonomy of the local church. And honestly, it would probably be near impossible for me to become a Presbyterian pastor since I'm not really formally theologically educated. I've got a background in stocking shelves, working in film and marketing. And although I know it's not impossible to become an ordained minister without a theological education, I have heard that it's near impossible to get one to be ordained without a theological education. So moving on to the next question from the same guy. What's the state of theological climate in Iceland? How many churches are there? Are Icelanders receptive to Reformed theology? We're currently the only Icelandic-speaking Baptist church in the country, and we're the only Reformed church in the country. And the way I explain it to people, because my idea of a healthy church is very different from others. Other ideas of a healthy church. If I was talking to a Pentecostal, I'd be very different in my thinking with regards to what a healthy church would look like. But here, if I set up these 4 points, if we set up these criteria, a church that is on the offensive, not on the defensive, but rather going out to the nation and seeking to evangelize them and make disciples. If we talk about a church that's solid theological stances and a church that understands and proclaims the gospel, And then maybe if we put in there a church that has minimal amount of heterodoxical beliefs, then I'd say with this as a criteria, these 4 points, I'd say with the others that I've asked, like when I've asked them how many, if this was the criteria, how many healthy churches do you think, or how many churches like this do we have in the country? And I'd agree with them with less than 5 or less than 5. And so that's 5 or less churches for a country of 340,000 people. And there are a bunch of church buildings over here. Like if you come, there's literally, you'll be driving the road and there will be a bunch of sheep and cows and horses and a house. And then all of a sudden there's a church building and you just scratch your head, wonder, are they preaching the gospel to the animals over here? What's going on? There's literally church buildings littered throughout the country, just almost no one in them at any time. They're just cool little cute church buildings. You'll probably see this if you follow Gospel Coalition a lot, or let's see, Together for the Gospel, and these sort of guys who publish theological articles. A lot of the time you'll see pictures of Iceland when there's a church building and a beautiful landscape in the background, and it's sort of cute church building, and it's a piece about a church or something like that. Then you see a lot of pictures up there from Iceland, but there's very little happening in almost all of them. And 140 priests we have in the country that are paid for. Their salary is paid for by the states. There's no separation between church and state currently. They're very liberal from a Lutheran tradition. They're kind of in the Jesus seminar type thinking. And then there's some faithful Christ followers who are persevering in meeting, but there's very little happening in some of these churches where the Christ followers may be tired, but they're still faithful in meeting together and that type of stuff. So as to Reformed theology, the only one that responds to it really well, I would say it's been interesting to me to see those people who had no preconceptions or no experience with the church and come to faith. It seems that they have the best ability to look at the sovereignty of God and just say, yeah, that makes sense. So those people, it's been very different. Rather than getting other people from other traditions that come in and they want to talk and they hear about this sovereignty of God and the bondage of the will and total depravity and all this type of stuff, and maybe they've been influenced by a lot of thinking that says kind of like, no, you're great, you're perfect the way you are, and that type of stuff. They definitely have a difficult time with it. And so it's the Christian culture that kind of has a difficult time with talking about Reformed theology with. Overall, humans are very much at the center of the thinking here in Iceland. So even just the gospel, the message that we're all sinners in need of a savior, that is very strange to their ears, because sort of typical of Icelandic thinking is that, no, I'm not really that bad, and if I just try hard enough, I can be the good person. But being human-centered has also caused a lot of people to create a God in their own head, subjecting to them and created in their image, rather than the biblical God, who is creating us in his image. So non-Christians hearing your stance on the sovereignty of God that have not come to faith yet, and your thought on the state of mankind, can be very offensive, of course, as I'm sure it's the same thing with you wherever you are. But we definitely need more churches in the country, and I don't want to be the person who prays for revival all the time, but refuses to play a part in the advance of what God has ordained to be the vehicle for revival, his church being planted and mobilized in this country. And I think the church is central to this. This is how God has ordained for us to go out and make disciples. The response of the disciples was to go out and plant churches. So I'm probably the least patriotic guy, or at least up there in my country. I'm actually hoping for the Icelandic language to just sort of die out, a quick death, to become something maybe like Gaelic in Ireland or something like that, so that we can open our nation up to a world of theological resources and open the world up to the floodgates of English-speaking church planters. I mean, if we would just stop speaking Icelandic and we just switch over to English, we can save so much as a government, in our educational system and that type of stuff. We wouldn't have to translate all the stuff that we do. And we, like, for the gospel advancement's sake, I'm just thinking, man, if we just spoke English already, we could have a whole world, many different nations of people who have a heart for planting churches that could come here without having to learn Icelandic. And Icelandic is a pain to learn. I've always heard that it's like the third hardest language in the earth to learn. And so it would be great if Icelandic would just sort of die out quickly and we'll start speaking English again, and we can flood this country with church planters. But until that happens, which I think will happen in the next 50 to 100 years, we're starting to see it now where teenagers, 3-4 teenagers are walking down the street. They're all Icelandic, but they're speaking English to each other. So I'm pretty sure it's going to happen pretty quickly. We don't have technology that understands Icelandic. Heck, I don't even understand how Icelandic works sometimes. So I don't know if technology will ever catch up with that. Now we're getting, Google and Alexa technology where you talk to them. I don't think they'll capture the language. Now autocorrect, I know in America when you use the English version, it sort of captures the words that you use and it gets better and better the more you use it. But with Icelandic, it just gets worse and worse. So I'm pretty sure with technology, with the flood of tourists coming to the country and immigrants and that type of stuff, our language will be gone in 50 to 100 years, sort of taking a backseat approach. I'm actually hoping for it. So is it true? Next question, is it true that only 0% of young Icelanders believe that God created the world in Iceland? Man, that is pretty shocking, isn't it? Now, this survey is an interesting survey done about 2 years ago by the Humanist Association of Iceland. I think the overall survey asked about 700 people about different theological issues and political issues about separation of church and state and that type of stuff. It was a very interesting survey, but there's one thing wrong with the question. Now, I want to say this, that the articles that I posted about this survey, they have not been wrong. The title of them have not been wrong. Usually it says something like this: according to a new survey, 0% of young Icelanders believe God created the world. And so that title is not wrong. According to this survey, 0% of Icelanders believe God created the world, but the survey is quite wrong, and let me explain that to you. So, first of all, what's wrong with it is, point number one, the question was very, very strange. I think it was the second question on there or something. It was asked, basically, do you believe that God created the world? As answer A. Or answer B, do you believe the Big Bang? And then there was C for other. And for most Christians, I don't think they have a problem with the Big Bang theory. They have a problem with maybe the timing of it, when it happened and that sort of stuff. Actually, when the Big Bang theory and Edward Hubble, he discovered what is called the red shift, and he discovered that the universe was expanding, therefore pointing towards a beginning. That was actually not a problem for the Christian. It was a problem for the atheist. I think there are many different names for this theory, but a lot of pantheists and polytheists and atheists held to a conviction that really creation was eternal and didn't need a beginning. Therefore, we don't need a creator. And so there was this, I forget what the scientific term for it was. I think it was a static state universe theory. I may Google this and check it out. I think that was the name for it. Yeah. I think that was the name for it. And that was held by most polytheists and pantheists and atheists. And so when the Big Bang theory came along and Edward Hubble with his redshift discoveries and Well, that was a problem for the atheist and the polytheist and the pantheist, and not the Christian, because the Christian had always held to the point of view that God created the world, therefore it had a beginning. So they pitted that against each other as sort of like, no, these two are not compatible, but rather for most Christians, I don't think they have a problem with this, they just have a problem with when it happened and that type of stuff, and others actually don't. And this survey was small to begin with. The overall pool was like 700 people. I think the under 25s in this category, who are the 0%? I think they were like around 100 people. So it was a tiny pool to draw from. Of course, there are young Icelanders who believe God created the world. There are some in our church. But according to these 100 people or so that were asked, none of them, they chose the Big Bang rather than God. So the headlines didn't lie, but the survey was not accurate. And actually, the day after, I had the privilege to go to one of the most popular radio programs here in Iceland called Icelanders to talk about this survey. And the head of the Humanist Association was there, and we were talking. I remember when we were about to go into the interview, I was sort of asking who he was, and he was the head of the speaker for the Humanist Association, something like that. I was like, yeah, so what's your education? What you've been working on? And he's like, well, I'm a PhD in what is it, philosophy. I was like, oh man, here am I, the guy who's stocking shelves and working in film. This is going to be great. He's going to throw out a bunch of words that I don't know, and I'm just going to get spanked on air, man. And then we got into a conversation, and he started. Well, I pointed out the stupidity of this. Like, you really should do some homework into the Christian worldview before you ask a question. Like, these are things that can't go together. So I told them I was willing to do it. If you want a Christian perspective on things before you do something stupid like this again, then feel free to talk to me. And then the conversation started talking about, okay, but if we think about the Big Bang, it opens up some interesting questions, like who created the Big Bang, and if there's a God, who created God, and we started talking about the nature of God. And I remember, have you ever heard that question? Could God ever build a rock so big that he couldn't lift it? Somehow or another, the conversation shifted, and this PhD in philosophy ended up posing this question to me, is saying, well, yeah, the belief in God, you just have to deal with some fallacies. And he was saying, well, could God create a rock that's big enough that he couldn't lift it? And I just remember, wait, I was thinking, you're a PhD in philosophy? And so it was a fun conversation. We started, I pointed out that actually the fallacies in the question itself, you can't really say that you're, he's not almighty because he can't be limited. that's a pretty stupid question to ask. But let's be honest, the survey is not right, but I'm guessing it's not too far off. I'm guessing this generation that's coming up is a generation that is very naturalistic in its perspective on the world, humanistic, and that type of stuff. So, definitely the survey is wrong, but the titles are not. And it's not as bad as it seems in that survey, but at the same time, it's not good either. Then I want to move on to this question, which I'm really excited about. This is a question from a missionary overseas with regards to planting a church in a godless culture, kind of fitting with the question that we just dealt with. Brother, we are in blank. He didn't want me to say. We're over 50 plus villages have absolutely no Christians, biblical followers of Christ living in them. As you know from experience, this is a hard thing to consider as we long to see the gospel advance in these villages. I am seeking wisdom on how to approach this. My question for you today is, how do you plant a church in an area where there are no Christians? Is that even our mission, or is it simply to move into these villages and begin as best as you can to make disciples? If so, how have you done this? Would love your wisdom on this regard. So I am by no means an expert on this and have made a lot of mistakes. I guess that makes me an expert in making mistakes, and you can learn some from me. So hopefully I can share with you some of the failures and the wins that we have learned from, and you can avoid the hard lessons that we've learned. But first of all, with regards to this portion of your question, should I even plant a church or should I just go and make disciples? I would say if you're qualified according to 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7 and Titus 1, and if you feel a call to plant a church and that call has been affirmed by godly men and women around you, I say go plant a church, man. We really have the same mission as the disciples did 2,000 years ago. And that is to Matthew 28, 18 through 20, to go into the world and make disciples, teach them to follow Christ's commandments and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's the same mission that they got, 2,000 years ago. And what is interesting about that is the way they responded to the mission. So they heard the same mission that we did, and their response was unanimous. They went around planting churches. So that's why I am a big proponent of planting churches. There are lots of parachurch organizations out there, YWAM or seminaries, and so on, but they will never replace the church as the central means by which God uses to fulfill his mission in the world. So if you're not called or qualified to plant a church, I would make it a priority to have your eyes open for locals who are converted, called, and qualified, and I would put emphasis on helping them plant a church as a missionary there. Like, that's what I would do. I would focus my attention on the church. I am very, very much a church guy. I think that's the means by which God has decided to make disciples, and I think that's what the disciples thought, because they heard the same mission that I read in Matthew 28, and they responded this way to it. So if you are going to start a church, I would send you. I would want to tell you to buy a copy or have someone send you a copy of a book that's called Church Planting Thresholds by the church planting ninja Clint Clifton. He has got a podcast as well. I forgot what it's called. Something like Church Planter. You'll find him. I think you can search for his name. You find his podcast. But that book is absolutely amazing. I wish I had that book when I was starting out, and I will use that book for all of the churches that we start from us. Like, that's something I've settled in my mind. This is super practical. At the same time, it gets you thinking about your role as a pastor, as an evangelist, what it means to start a church, and also thinking about the fact that you're not just wanting to start a church, you want to start a healthy church. And if you want to impact a nation, you are wanting to start an orchard of churches. Like, you don't want to just plant a tree. You want to see an orchard grow and happen. So it's a great book. I think it's got like 70 thresholds. It's super practical. It's literally got like pages where you fill in the blanks, and it walks you through thinking about the vision of the church, what it means to be a qualified elder. Are you qualified? Have people affirmed that around you? What to do when looking for elders and that type of stuff. It's just an amazing, practical book by a guy that has a lot of wisdom in this church planting arena. He's actually one of our interim elders, as we believe in the plurality of elders, and we only have me on the ground that's currently an elder. We have Clint Clifton as an interim elder, and then Colby Garman from Pillar Church of Dumfries. And I've had the joy to know Clint Clifton, and he's one of my best friends, and I absolutely love the guy, and I've had the ability to tap into some of that wisdom that he's got. And I would absolutely recommend Clint Clifton to you in his book, Church Planting Thresholds. They've done amazing jobs at their church, which I think is like 11 years old. And I don't remember exactly, but I think in those 11 years, they've planted like, I don't want to exaggerate, but I think it's like 20 churches. So he knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for the past 11 years, and it's been absolute joy to get to know him. I'd also recommend 9 Marks materials. That has absolutely transformed my thinking about the church, especially since I was just stuck on this island in the middle of the Atlantic. 9 Marks materials are amazing materials. I would recommend you start with a book called Compelling Community, and also Mark Dever's book, 9 Marks of a Healthy Church, because you want to, like I said, you don't want to just start a church. You want to start a healthy church, a disciple-making church, a multiplying and Christ-exalting church. The goal is not just to start a church, but rather through the community of God to display and to uplift the glory of God and to bring fame to his name and not shame to his name. So with regards to there not being any Christians in those communities, well, I'd like to encourage you in some ways the Lord has encouraged me. I don't know if you're Reformed or not, but if you are there, there is an immense encouragement and weight lifted off of your shoulders to build the church and evangelize. God is the one who draws people to himself, and Christ is the one who builds his church. And that does not matter if there are 0 Christians there or not. God changes hearts, and he can do that with a Peter-type sermon where 3,000 people are converted and saved, or people coming into relationship with God one by one and realizing the glories of the gospel. And he has called us to be instruments in his hands to bring fame to his name. And so I'll just be sure not to carry the weight on your shoulder, because this is ultimately Christ's church, not your church that you're going to be starting here. And with that in mind, I'd say pray. I love the prayers in the Bible that you see for the people to come to God and to come to know him. I love reading biographies when I'm down where God used broken vessels to bring the good news and transform hearts and nations. And I'd just recommend to pray with John Knox when he said, give me Scotland or I die, to make sure that your ultimate goal is not really that nation, but rather your Lord, but at the same time having a heart for your nation that says, give me Scotland or kill me. I really ask God to see that the nation you're in, like he sees it. I remember when my heart was broken for Iceland and I wanted to see churches planted over here. I was working in a grocery store and I was literally battling tears as I was listening to gospel-saturated sermons during my workday. And sometimes I had to go to the bathroom and just cry, because I was thinking, like, God, why did you send John Piper to America? Why did you send David Platt to America? Couldn't you send someone over here? And just thinking about my friends and my family who hadn't heard the gospel, who needed to hear these gospel-saturated sermons. And my heart was absolutely breaking over the state of Christianity here in Iceland. So I'd say, let your heart be completely broken by the reality that you face. But be sure, and I've had to learn the hard way, be sure to be not driven by despair, but rather the glory of God and to enjoy him forever. That's why we do this. Ultimate goal is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And we make him glorified by the preaching of the person and work of Jesus Christ and sharing the gospel with the people around us. Because if you are driven by despair, burnout will quickly follow, and I've experienced that too. It is not an energy source that will keep you going. You will be sort of like a pencil that just keeps getting sharpened, and ultimately there's like a little thing left. And I'd say, do not be driven by despair, but rather the glory of God. So with regards to there being no Christians there, I would also just encourage you to really dwell on that. And if that is a reality that can be fully known, as I'm sure you cannot know everyone in those 50 villages to see their hearts. And I encourage you to dwell on 1 Kings 19 for a second. For Elijah is there and he's driven by despair because the prophets are being killed, and he talks as if the entire nation has left God. But by verse 18, God says that he will still have 7,000 that will not bow their knee to Baal or Baal. And I know what it's like to look around you and to see with pessimism like there's nothing happening, but be encouraged. God has his people there, I'm sure of it, even though it's maybe not obvious. I'm reminded of a guy that we were meeting in this classroom, this tiny classroom, actually probably smaller than our office now. We could fit maybe 20 chairs in there. And all of a sudden we didn't even have a sign outside or nothing. Like, we had no budget for anything like that. I think actually this table used to be our sign when we had no budget. I just stenciled a bunch of pallets. So maybe we had that out there, but all of a sudden walks in this guy who I had never met. And he started talking with me, and he started talking about these preachers that no one in Iceland knows, like all the Reformed guys. And he's talking about him being Reformed in his theology and God, basically transforming his life. And I'm just like, where'd you come from, man? Like, what church are you about? How did you hear about these guys? And God was doing the work in him, and I didn't even know. Like, we started the church out, there was 4 of us, me and my wife, and Friedberg and his wife, Christine. And I remember I left the church we're at. God was changing my view of what the church is and what a healthy church is, and I left. And I was the youth pastor at the time, and they took over. And I realized when I posted on Facebook, basically, we're going to start a church. Anyone interested, come Wednesday night for a Bible study. I posted that, and they come. And I realized that God's been doing work in them, transforming their thinking towards who God is, and they are listening to all the same pastors I'm listening to, and they've seen the beauty of the gospel when he grew up in church and realized I hadn't really seen that before. And you hear about these stories, and I wonder sometimes, I wonder how many people I haven't met yet who God is doing something amazing in, like he did with me. I got converted in a grocery store listening to podcasts. Why couldn't that happen to someone else? And maybe there are 5 people out there that I haven't met yet, maybe 10, maybe 100, who knows? So I would encourage you to maybe, as things maybe look bleak, be a little optimistic about God and his ability. Maybe there are people there that you don't know, and maybe it's just not obvious. And here's a hard lesson that I learned as well, that when it's tough, and I'm sure it is going to be tough to preach the gospel where you're at, to bring in leaders to talk about your frustrations with, and not share it with the people of God that you're supposed to be shepherding. I talked about the difficulty of evangelizing here in Iceland for a long time, and later created a culture of people depressed over how difficult it was to evangelize, when I knew for a fact that some of these people that were talking about how hard it was to evangelize had never shared the gospel with anyone here. And I see, this meme going on Facebook where there's a picture of this church with thousands of people and it's packed full, and below there's a church, it's got 20 people and it's really half full and that type of stuff. And the caption says when you tickle the ears, when you preach health and wealth, then there's the full building. And then below, the half-empty building with the 20 people, when you speak the truth, this is what it looks like. And I'll just say, man, don't fall into that victim mentality, because you do not know what's going to happen. You don't know what the Lord's plan is for you. And it may that the Lord's plan for me or you is to pastor the church of 20 or 30 people. But was Peter preaching the truth when 3,000 people got converted? Was Charles Spurgeon preaching the truth when he preached to the largest crowd ever gathered in London? Was Jonah speaking the truth when the whole nation repented? Or you even look around today about these healthy, gospel-centered, Christ-exalting preachers and pastors of churches like Matt Chandler and Mark Dever and David Platt and Tim Keller. Are they preaching the truth? There's a lot of people there. You do not know what the Lord has in plan. And it may be that it's our job to pastor a church of 20 people and then make disciples who take over and go further than us. Or it may be that he uses you in a Peter-type sermon, and a lot of people get stung to the heart and they repent. So if you start a church, I say that you start a church, and right from the start, you will have 2 members. You will have you and your wife, and your kids to minister to. We started out with 4 adults and 1 kid. 5 months in, I remember the other couple, she got pregnant, they had a baby. And so about 5 months in December, there were 3 Sunday services where the only people showed up was Svava, my wife, and I, and Mikael. And it's discouraging, man. But at the same time, it is a small flock, but it is a flock that God has taken care of. And where 2 or 3 are gathered, he is there. And so that, that's a church. That's a church. So I would say start a church and minister. Start by ministering to your children and to your wife. And in the beginning, and I'm stealing this from the church planting ninja, Clint Clifton himself, I would say view yourself as a 70% evangelist and 30% pastor. And year by year, make sure your pastor percentage goes up and your evangelist percentage goes down, so that in the end, maybe it will be completely reversed. You're a 30% evangelist and 70% pastor to equip others to be evangelists. So as to how you start, that all depends on your giftings and available opportunities to get to know people and share the gospel. And here are some ways that I've just thought about and done throughout the years. I have some access to media, to radio stations, and to newspapers, and I've used that platform so that that I can tell people about the gospel. Maybe you're gifted in street evangelism, and that's your way to go. Maybe you just stop people in the street and share the gospel with them. A couple of our members keep their eyes on Facebook, and they follow the pages of the Humanist Association and the Atheist Association and the Pagan Association, and they basically just wait for them to host an event, and then they show up there on Friday evening or Saturday morning or whatever, and they just talk about the gospel with people. And one of the things I do is just pick 1 or 2 coffee shops that you constantly go to, get to know the workers there, develop a relationship with them, get to know, their struggles and that type of stuff, and maybe you can share the gospel with them. Pick one barber shop that you go to every single time so that you get to know the barber, and you've got basically a captured audience for 30 minutes or whatever when you're getting your haircut. Prison ministry. That may be something that is open to you. It's been difficult to get that going here, but it may be something that's available to you. Maybe there's a university by you. Maybe you can sit in on philosophy classes or theology classes, and you can get into conversations about that. Maybe you can eat there during lunch and see if you run into students who want to have a conversation. Maybe you have kids. Are they in preschool or school? Are there, parent boards that you can be a part of to get to know the other parents of the school or preschool? Throw some awesome parties. Invite lots of people when your kids are having birthdays, or when it's just a nice summer day and a Saturday. Bring your barbecue grill out and try to get some of your neighbors out to just eat barbecue with you. I don't know what the context is, so I'm just throwing these out there. Maybe host Christian-themed parties. Celebrate Reformation Day, Easter, Christmas. Invite people to that. Share a little message about what this day means to you and your faith. Maybe your kids play sports and you can engage with the parents there. We've done ESL camps where we teach Icelandic children English, and that's connected us with parents. We've hosted business seminars for startups who want to get better in managing their business, and we just planted our people around there, and we've gotten some awesome connections through that. If you think about it, in the book of Acts, it's not really like a whole bunch of events that happen where there's this huge gathering that decide to go out on sort of an evangelistic campaign. I mean, there's not really like these big events that happen where there's like a crusade or something. There's a lot of 2x2. They're just walking and they see someone and they're open up for conversation and they speak and they get converted and they start a church and that type of stuff. It seems to me very, very natural. And maybe I've, throughout the years, made it too big to do anything. I know I made the mistake. I was a part of a church in Huntsville, Alabama for 3 years, from 16 to 19. They had about 6,000 people at the time. I don't know how big they are now, but I know their lighting budget was probably bigger than the budget of the church back home. And they would do these They would do parades through the projects. They would minister to the projects. They would give, buy washer machines and all that. They would feed the homeless. Hundreds of homeless people would come to the church and they would feed them and that type of stuff. And I came back to Iceland realizing the limited resources that I have. And I was just like, yeah, what am I supposed to do? But then reading through the book of Acts later on, man, I see it's not really big events. They're just walking. And it would be awesome if we could feed the homeless like they did then. But I have to work with the resources that we have. And really, being limited is amazing because it forces you to innovate. This table that I'm using right now is about 3 years old. This was we didn't have money to buy feather flags, but we were in a school building and we wanted people to know that I was there. I went to my old grocery store job. I asked if I could take some pallets. I tore them apart. I got some spray paint, and I stenciled a board of pallets to put them outside of our school, and they worked out great. And a bunch of hipsters were actually really oh man, this is so cool, how innovative and awesome. And I was just like, well, it was just really, we needed money and we didn't have any. So, innovation it happens a lot when you have limited amount of resources. Sorry, let me just get water here. And as we say in Iceland, the necessity teaches the naked person how to sew. It's an inappropriate saying, but it's true. Necessity teaches the naked person how to sew. And I don't want to, that's not the complete translation of it, but I'm just going to skip the actual translation of that sentence. Just ask God to open up your eyes, to lay hold on the good things that he has in store for you to do. That's what I would do, and make sure that in the meantime, when you're putting your hands on those tasks and you're doing the things that he has placed in front of you, be driven by the gospel. I love dwelling on Ephesians 2:8-10. What does he do? You're not saved by works. No one can boast, you're saved by Christ. And then he goes into, go now and lay holds on the works. I'm trying to translate this from Icelandic. But read that, Ephesians 2:8-2. Be compelled by the gospel to go out and lay hold of the works that he has already planned for you. So do that. May the Lord use you as an instrument in his hands to bring fame to his name, man, and not shame. And there are days where you forget this, but I think it's good. If you can start a day just keeping your eyes open as to, okay, God, what do you have in store for me today? I think that can be a day used for great things. And so I think we're getting to the end here. One of the only questions, because I don't know how long I've been doing this, but it seems like I've been doing this for quite a while. We don't really have a time limit on this thing. We're just going to go over the subject, but I think I'm not going to go sharing about our testimony right now. Maybe we can save that for the next episode, depending on what kind of questions come in, of course, if you guys are uploading them. So the last question is, what is the Iceland Project? The Iceland Project is an initiative to plant healthy, gospel-centered, disciple-making, multiplying, and Christ-exalting churches in the nation of Iceland. And currently, the Iceland Project is one church, and that's our church, Lofstone, right there. By the way, I noticed that a lot of you asked for these t-shirts when they came out, and I don't know why. This is in Icelandic. You guys do realize that this is, I think you'll just get a lot of weird looks if you wear this in America, right? Anyways, so we currently have one church in the Iceland Project, and that's our church. But we got one coming up in 2 to 3 years' time. That's going to be in downtown Reykjavik. So we're really excited about that. And number 2, the Iceland Project is an initiative dedicated to finance and equip church planters in Iceland. So one of the things that I found incredibly difficult, for the first couple of years, we weren't financed at all. I think some things started trickling in around our 3rd year, and then we were fully financed by our 4th year. It was really difficult because there's a lot of time and resources spent in fundraising rather than work on the ground. And so what I hope to do is something that the Baptists in the States have managed to do well, especially I'm so excited about David Platt being the head of the IMB. I'm just super excited about it. But the IMB is an amazing tool where the Southern Baptist churches pool their money and resources so that they can fund missionaries to just focus on missions and not have to come back for a year to do a fundraising trip around the States, or like I do, like I may come back, go out of the country 3 times a year or something like that to meet with people, see if their finances available, if they want to partner with us in the Iceland Project and that type of stuff. And so I want the Iceland Project to be that for future church planters in Iceland. I want us to plant 250 churches in the next 100 years. So I want the Iceland Project to grow up and be this sort of umbrella organization that can take finances from all different directions and can allocate them to the people that are on the ground planting churches and being missionaries, so that they don't have to take a chunk out of their year and get away from their families and stuff to go out to the U.S. But rather we could just say, we could send someone for the Iceland Project to go to these different churches to explain to them all the different works going on. And so that's what we're trying to do. Now we are moving towards getting a second couple on the ground. So that's what we're fundraising for this year. So if you want to be a part of that, look to the beginning of the episode. I mentioned how you could be a part of that, but pray for that as well. We also want to have theological training by setting up a local seminary here. We are already putting the groundwork to that. Right now, it looks like 4 weekends out of the year, intensive weekends with 10 to 12 hours of teaching material, where we're filming this and creating a database of lectures with Icelandic subtitles so that local churches in the future can use that here in Iceland. So we're setting up this local seminary so that we can train people here. Because what we found out, that if people go out of the country for seminary degrees, first of all, a lot of them never come back because they realize that they can actually get paid for their degree somewhere else, but there's probably hard work and no pay going to be happening in Iceland. And then secondly, some of them come back and they realize the state of the church and they just faceplant. They're just like, I'm not going to do anything. This is horrible. And so we want to provide local theological training. And we want to do this as well by translating material over to Icelandic, some solid theological resources over to Icelandic. And then theological training by preaching from the churches, of course, and discipleship happening in the churches. And actually, what I just mentioned a point ago was that we want to translate theological works to Icelandic. The first translation we're working on may be odd to a lot of you, but we decided to translate the Jesus Storybook Bible because it is one of the only translations that we expect may make a profit and therefore may help fund other translation projects that are coming in the future. And so one of you asked, how's the thing going? How are we, financially, where are we at to make this book a reality? Now, I wanted to tell you, we have translated the book. We are working on editing the book right now, and we have to edit the graphics as well. And we've already raised $6,000 for the printing. I think we're about 10,000 short if we want to go for 3,000 copies of the book. So I think we're looking at $16,000 is some of the offers that we've been getting. So yeah, that's where we're at with the book. According to the contract, we have until December 2018 to fulfill and print the book. So we have about 11 months to go. And so if you want to be a part of making that a reality, you can send us an email, thestandardbaptist@gmail.com. So I won't have time for the testimony, but to end this episode, I'd like to give a little bit of the travel schedule for 2018. That is the times where this Stranded Baptist is not going to be stranded anymore. I'll be flying over to Knoxville, Tennessee, spending some time at Sevier Heights Baptist Church from February 11th to the 26th. So that's coming up in less than 3 weeks. Also be visiting some nearby states, talking with pastors about involvement in the Iceland Project. So if you're serious out there and thinking about getting on board with helping finance planting churches in Iceland, then send me an email at thestrandedbaptist@gmail.com. From April 10th to the 18th, I'll be in Dumfries, Virginia, close to Washington. and Louisville, Kentucky for the Together for the Gospel Conference. I'm planning on squeezing in some sort of lunch or something for pastors that are interested in learning about the Iceland project. So if you're going, let me know if you're interested in that. And from May 1st to July 28th, we are going off on a sabbatical to the United States. Our family is. Mostly we're going to be staying in Virginia area and Colorado. One of the things I'm excited about there, one of the work-related things I'm going to do is an 8-day intensive at 9 Marks, an intensive at 9 Marks at Capitol Hill Baptist Church that I am super, super excited about. And then lastly, in October, I'll be going to Mongolia with at least two other guys from our church. We're going to go to Radstock Roundtable event. If you want to know more about Radstock Network, which we are a part of, which is a network of churches planting churches, then you can go to radstock.org to learn more about the Mongolia trip. It has been a blessing to be with you today. Hope I didn't speak too fast, and hope I didn't go too long, and hope the material wasn't too... I hope I didn't go over too much material in this episode, but I'll learn. This is going to get better with time as I get used to this microphone in my face. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. Please feel free to subscribe or like or rate or whatever it is you do to get the word out there. Share this with your friends. It has been a blessing talking with you. Now, if we can get some outro music. Let's see what's going on here. That's it. Royalty free. There you go. God bless you guys.